The internet has to stop pretending like the prequels are good. Please, I beg you, please stop. These aren't good movies.
If you want to publicly support J.K. Rowling, know that I personally will not view you as an ally anymore, right? If that matters to you, then include that in your ethical calculus. If it doesn't, do your thing.
Go talk to the AG candidates, talk to your state representative candidates, talk to your federal representative candidates, and ask them what their stances are in public, in front of others. Make them go on the record on these things, because that is so incredibly important and valuable when people are trying to make that decision on who's going to stand for people and who's going to compromise.
This is our new OutCenter podcast. We have a regular podcast now and other shows that are coming soon alongside our No Silly Questions. You can ask your own question at outcenter.org/questions. And I have a feeling that as we get rolling, we'll have a little bit more exciting intros, but here we are for now. Hi, Gerik.
Hello. Yes, I'm very excited to be here. This is our first go at the OutCenter Podcast, and we're very excited to chat with folks and share a little bit more about what we're doing.
I think one of the fun things about this is we do get to see people out in the community. Like we saw a lot of people this past weekend at 2 different No Kings events, but there's obviously a lot more that we're up to throughout the week. And, there's a lot of things that we can't always share in the context of a town hall with a specific topic or in these very specific short clippy videos that we've done. So I think it's great that you and I will have a chance to talk a little bit more about other things that are going on, what's on our mind, what's happening in the community. I think to begin, Gerik, one of the important things that we want to talk about with our OutCenter folks is you. Actually, you're on the hot seat, you're in the spotlight. As folks may have already seen through our social media or through talking with us in real life, OutCenter has a new interim executive director, and that interim executive director is you, Gerik Maverick. I wonder if you can tell us a little bit about your origin story, about how you got to OutCenter. I'll let you drive, whatever you think would be helpful for folks to know about you.
Absolutely. I am from Southwest Michigan, born and raised, and I guess I'll go back to college. Was in Bible college right here in our community. And during that time in my life, it really sparked this love of giving back to the community. It was always like this opportunity that I had to do that pastoral type ministry, to care for others, to lead others, to mentor and disciple is the word that we'd use back in the day. But it was really just for me, those opportunities to, do those events, do those programs, do those support things in our community that has real impact on individuals. And so for me, that was something that I just loved. And it was, for where I was raised and the community I was raised in and the family I was raised in, that was the most natural path to do that kind of work. After early 2020, it was back in the before 2020, it was 2017, 2018. I started that deconstruction journey that a lot of folks find themselves in. And over the years, just found myself looking for opportunities outside of the church, looking for things that were other systems that I can put myself into and help and support and do that work. I remember I was sitting with my brother. I was working third shift at the time, and he was working at a bank. And so if I laid over a little bit of time, we could get lunch together sometimes. And so I remember sitting at I think it was a Culver's in Roseland, right on the border of Indiana and Michigan. And we were talking about just what I want to do next. You're in that stage of life where you're like, I'm not loving working third shift. I'm not loving this. And I really feel like I want to be doing this kind of work. And I remember saying to him, I just want to find a small nonprofit that I can pour all of my energy and creativity and heart into. And I feel like that would be best case scenario for me. And about a month later, the OutCenter, I was driving downtown Benton Harbor and ran into the executive director there, Mary Jo, and started talking, and they were looking for a program coordinator. And, about a couple weeks later, November 2021, I get brought on as the program coordinator. My role soon grows to program director. And then 4.5 years later, here I am. A lot of Pride Fest, a lot of programs, a lot of really, really cool memories and stories. And I just really fell in love with this work, and I'm so grateful for the opportunity that I've had to do that pastoral work, that community building work over these last 4.5 years. And I just look forward to continuing it on.
So being here since 2021 means that you've seen a wide, wow, sweeping changes in legislation in the political environment. What's changed and what's shifted? And I guess what's important to know about those shifts and changes from 2021 to today?
Yeah, I mean, 2021, we were kind of coming out of and in the peak of this growth in acceptance, growth in progressivism, growth in pro equity um, sentiments and policy. I remember we were starting to see some real wins on the state side. We were obviously seeing real wins across the country. ELCRA, I remember being the big fight in the early couple of years. ELCRA is the Elliott-Larsen Civil Rights Act, and the interpretation from our Supreme Court at the time was that LGBTQ folks were protected under ELCRA, but that was not the letter of the law. That was not explicit. It was a interpretation of, I believe, bias of sex was the justification there. And one of the big wins that we got over these last couple of years, I believe it was 2023, was that it was official that ELCRA now included explicitly LGBTQ folks. And that's really important because courts change, courts can be overruled, but the black and white letter of the law can't, or at least can't be as easily overturned. And so that was really enshrining protections that we had written in pencil in many ways in the state of Michigan, but really writing them in ink, writing them in that black and white letter of the law. And so that was very exciting. But I remember, I mean, so much of this was also on the local level, making sure that our local systems were meeting the expectations of the state, meeting the expectations of the federal government at the time. I remember the Title IX protections that we had were a huge thing, and us just trying to get that information in students' hands, in parents' hands, and faculty's hands, that these are things that are protected, and that your school and school board have liability if they're not protecting those things. And so there was a lot of really, really exciting things. And then there's been, over these last couple of years, a cooling effect where many of these laws are still on the books. ELCRA still protects LGBTQ people. But pressures from the federal government, pressures from some of these other movements have created this chilling effect where the implementation of these laws are not always being done. And that creates real problems. And we're starting to see that now with the AG. We're starting to see that with some of these other systems starting to keep these systems accountable to state law. And that's very, very exciting to see.
Yeah, and by the AG, you mean the Attorney General Dana Nessel. What
Yeah.
has her work looked like in the past few years?
Yeah, so she has done a good amount of fighting for Michiganders. I mean, I think I was just at an event. I think she said she had over 50 um, lawsuits with the federal government in this last year and a half. I think it was 50. It might have been 30 something. A lot, dozens of lawsuits against the federal government right now. And we just spoke briefly, and I haven't had a chance to dig deep into this, but there's recently uh, some movement on the U of M side of some of these gender affirming care bans. Again, I have to dig more into it. It's been a little bit busy this weekend. But there is some movement, and I've talked to a couple of the AG candidates that are also running because she's termed out. And there's been some good feelings about the AG's office being an ally to LGBTQ people for the next handful of years as well.
So it's heavy work. There's a lot going on legislatively in terms of advocacy. What is it that gets you up in the morning, keeps you going when things get rough or stressful? You talked a little bit about this desire to, care for people and to kind of pour your heart out into work. But what exactly does that look like? What are those key motivators for you?
Yeah. I mean, my dog is usually what gets me up in the morning, if I'm being honest with you. But if we're besides that, I think what gets me excited about this work is those moments where you see the impact that it can have on folks. I remember there was at one of our Pride festivals, there was this drag performance. I believe it was one of the Greatest Showman songs that they were performing as well, which I think is fun. But there was a parent singing the lyrics to their kid who was wearing a pride flag, doing the thing that a lot of the kiddos tend to do at our pride events. Um, and like they were saying, oh no, it was like that song, like you are perfect to me, like the pretty please, like whatever that song. And they were singing the lyrics to this kid like very emotionally, and it like was one of those moments where I'm just like watching the performer and like started getting teary eyed, like watching this. And drag doesn't normally do that for me. Like I think it's fun, but I don't often find myself getting emotional. Um, and it was just this like moment of like, oh, seeing this parent like in downtown Dowagiac, getting to like support and affirm their kid was like the coolest little moment. And I just hold on to little moments like that. I hold on to moments like seeing GSA kids at New Buffalo schools go to their school board meeting and advocate for inclusive policies for their trans siblings. And like, that's so cool to see these, kids feeling empowered, kids feeling supported. And, we see this with adults, we see this with everybody that we serve. We get these little like moments, these little windows into the impact that our organization can have. And I mean, to me, that's what keeps the fires burning. That's what keeps me going, is knowing that the work we do does have an impact and does help people in our communities. It's really cool stuff. I feel incredibly lucky to be here.
So now that you are the interim executive director, I'm sure you have plans and a vision for what's next for OutCenter. So what is next for OutCenter? What should we be looking forward to seeing, or what changes or advocacy work will OutCenter be evolving into?
Yeah, I mean, I think advocacy work is one of the key pillars there. I want to continue to build on what we've been able to do. We've got such a strong foundation and history of impact in this community, and I think we have the opportunity now to just continue to up what we've done in the past. So I think, when I think of advocacy, my theory on making change in our communities has always been centered on people, has always been centered on elevating people, has always been centered on educating people and then activating people in our communities and helping them to organize. I think that's what makes that story about the kids at the New Buffalo GSA feel so resonant with me, is seeing those kids be given the understanding, the resources, the support to feel comfortable going to a school board meeting, talking in a public meeting, and advocating for themselves and their friends. And I think that's what I want to see us continue to build on and do more of. And then again, continuing some of the more impactful work that we do, you know, doing more big public events. And that's not just pride festivals, that's town halls, that's, get-togethers, that's meetups, that's programs. I really love that we have some great volunteers leading things like book clubs, and Surrett Nature Center is a great partner of ours doing lavender adventurer hikes. And I think finding more opportunities to build that ecosystem of support is really what I see us moving towards. And then also, frankly, this, getting more information out into the airways, getting more information out. Some of our most popular website pages are informational, like how to use pronouns or how to do things like this and that. And I think we're positioned as an organization to provide that knowledge, and to, distribute it out into our communities. And so that's what I'm really focused on, is, again, that education piece, that activation piece, and then again, that community building piece.
Well, I'm glad that we are getting to know you a little bit more, and I'm sure we will continue to get to know you and see the work that you're putting out there in the coming weeks and months. So this is an exciting time for OutCenter. I'm excited to be here and to be a part of this new work with this vision. So this is
A
exciting.
huge part, a huge part of this is Willow, and I want to make sure you get your flowers as well. You are very, very valuable to the OutCenter. I'm so incredibly glad to be doing this with you.
Well, I do like flowers, and I do enjoy working with you. So it's a good time all around, and I'm excited for this new era.
Absolutely.
We have a few things we want to talk about with our community. And one of the big things, you've probably seen this on our social media, is no kings. Gerik, I will once again let you drive. A lot of this was your work. So, Gerik, go ahead and tell us what No Kings is and was, and how we were involved in the past weekend, and how folks can continue to stay involved in this advocacy and public work.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So No Kings is a nonpartisan protest movement that makes national calls to protest. I believe this is the third No Kings protest that just happened over the weekend. And for us, this was an opportunity for the OutCenter to, one, provide some support and resources to some of our local protest organizations. We are in the position where over the last several years, we've learned quite a bit about security. We've learned quite a bit about how to run large events safely. And we've also just, we have things like walkie-talkies and vests and some of the equipment needed to be able to do this well. And so we were, really wanting to get involved deeply with some of these things, with No Kings, with, again, I think a lot of our advocacy historically has been in small rooms with groups of people and has been at, town hall meetings when a specific thing happens, or has been, very specific and I think in relatively small crowds and not as public as I think some folks may see. And so No Kings presented us the opportunity to up the ante a little bit and make sure that folks in our community see the work that we're doing, know the work that we're doing, and, have us be able to add, substantially to the voices and the movements that are happening in our community organically. And so that was really what was exciting about No Kings to us was we saw a need in our community and we saw an opportunity for us to be more visible in our community, and we took it. And we were really, really grateful to our partners at the Coalition for Democracy for allowing us to come in and help and, be that co-lead with us. And it was just, it was such a beautiful event. It was such a beautiful time seeing, I think we had 600 people show up in downtown Niles. I think the numbers from No Kings St. Joe was 12 to 1,500 people. So, we're talking well over 2,000 people coming out on a Saturday in the middle of March or at the end of March to protest and to show their support for LGBTQ folks, for migrant folks, for people in our communities that are suffering right now. It was just a really beautiful time and a cool time, and again, kind of representative of that momentum shift that we're looking at as an organization is really trying to activate our community members and plug our community members into the work that we've been doing for so long.
I think that activation is key. In a lot of ways, No Kings is kind of a first step for a lot of people. I think especially for
Yeah.
people that maybe haven't found themselves doing the ground game of advocacy work. That can be for all kinds of reasons. But what is important, I think, for people to take from No Kings is that it's something that we should all be involved in. We should all be involved in direct action. And while No Kings offers this open door, this first step for a lot of people, it does seem like there needs to be a few more steps taken through that open advocacy door. I know I'm thinking about how can we take people to the next step? How can we help people move on to more direct action for more material change for our communities after they've kind of tested the waters with No Kings?
Yeah, I think one thing that I think has been well documented and that a lot of people now have a deeper understanding of is these theories of like pipelines in political movements. I think it's all been well documented, like the right wing pipeline from watching how to date people videos to, falling down to, more extremist content. And I think No Kings presents an opportunity that I think, and I'll say neither side. And when I say neither side, I mean there are some more critical progressive folks who think it's a waste of time. And then there are some more, we like to call them the people that are like brunchers, quote unquote, is the way that I've seen people refer to them, which are like, oh, I'd love to do this one thing and then not do anything else. And I think both sides of that argument miss out on what No Kings actually represents, which is a mass movement of people, which is something that you should always be responsive to, and an opportunity to help folks understand more about what they can do. I think over the last several decades, we've seen a degradation of civic education in our country. We've seen unions fall to the wayside, especially these smaller communities. We have seen social organizations, things like, like your Lions clubs, your lodges, these different, Elks Lodge type of things. These are community resources that are slowly dying out. And these are things that, for so many years were the backbones of communities. They were how people met their neighbors. They were how people learned more about, how their local civic systems worked. If they had a problem, they could go, they knew, oh, if I have a problem, I can go to this guy. I see him every other Friday. And we just don't have that as a community anymore. And that means that we have to intentionally rebuild some of those supports, some of those systems, some of those ways of educating people. And I think No Kings presents us with an opportunity to deliver that kind of information to folks, which is what we did. And it presents this opportunity to get folks activated and engaged in work to go from step one, going to the protest, to then step two, step three, step four, and continue down a pipeline of good civic advocacy. And I think, that's really what we see as the opportunities with these protests is, I talk to a lot of those protesters. I go to a lot of protests. I talk to people that are organizing these things, and they all kind of have the same goals. Like they want to see bigger change. They want to know what they can do. They want to do more. They just have to be given the information a lot of times or the opportunity to do more. And so I think that's really what we're focused on in how we interact with No Kings and why we interact with No Kings and why we're going to continue to work with similar things in the future. Is really helping people make those connections, learn who they can go to, learn some valuable information and tips and just basic things even so that they can become effective advocates for themselves and for their friends and for their community.
Yeah, I think that there is a common ground that is not found through a very milquetoast sort of purity testing or anti-purity testing, right? So we have some folks saying, oh, well, you should support these different candidates, even if they're not great on, say, trans issues. And it's like, no, that is a particular sign that that person is not going to stand up for folks who have been cast aside, right? That's sort of a non-starter. But I think that there's a difference between, say, throwing your support behind a candidate who is not great and who has non-starter positions versus finding coalition building with other people, right? If we need to have a show of force to say, hey, we are out here, we don't support wars, we don't support the cover-ups of the files, we don't support those things. I don't need to have like every single talking point of a particular orthodoxy lined up. So I feel like that is a fun little nuance for folks to, no matter where they're at in organizing or in political involvement or social involvement, is to understand the differences between those two sort of planes, right? We can expect better things of politicians and community leaders, and we can expect there to be ethical standards, and we shouldn't settle for less. But when it comes to local organizing and who we can partner with, there seems to be some different things that we should be thinking about and considering when it comes to who we can join together with, say, on kind of a political picket line like No Kings.
Yeah, I think, there's a lot of people within the political realm and social realm and, policy realms who believe that public opinion is this fixed thing or this like immutable thing that if you do a poll and it says the public believes this, then you have to go by that and that's the law now. And I think we've really lost, especially in spaces like ours, we've lost this understanding that public opinion is moldable. Public opinion evolves. Public opinion can grow in understanding or it can shrink in understanding. And I think, we're seeing right now, depending on your polling data, a waning in support for trans people right now. And that is because we have overwhelming propaganda telling people to be afraid of trans siblings, telling them to be afraid of the trans person, 1 in 100 or 1 in 100,000 who want to play a sport in high school. They're being told these things, and we don't have a strong counter narrative because, like you are alluding to, there are folks who are tangentially supposed to be oppositional forces who are conceding ground, who are not standing on LGBTQ rights, are not standing for trans folks right now. And I think, one of the things we talked about at our No Kings protest in St. Joe that we were a guest speaker at was this understanding that all of these issues are connected, that the minute that you give up on one of these issues, it's just a domino effect. You have to hold your ground on every single one of these things and build this coalition of people. And I think just, we have to cling to this understanding that people's minds can be changed, people's hearts can be changed, people's understanding can be changed, but you have to actually try. And I think too often than not, there's just not the political will or social will to want to do that difficult work of changing hearts and minds. And that is the core of what the OutCenter has been for the last 2 decades, and very much the core of what we're looking at in the future is how do we change hearts and minds? And I think, that is through things like our pathways workshops, that is through things like our programming, through our public events, through things like this, where we're just having conversations with people and making shareable clips on social media that folks who may disagree with us may come across. I think those are those steps that we can start to build towards changing minds, and also, frankly, emboldening people who do agree with us, emboldening people who are pro equity, who are pro LGBTQ, to be stronger advocates in their circles as well. I think that's, again, it's building that ecosystem of advocacy that, is going to be key to addressing some of the things that we're seeing, like that are real concerns, that are real, you know, it's overwhelming at times, but it is also the answer is strangely simple, if that makes sense.
I think it does. I mean, it is sort of interesting to think about the fact that we supposedly live in a democracy, but those of us who tend to be in a more progressive direction are told you better vote for these certain candidates or support these policies, even if it involves a cutting off of people who are symbolic of those who are marginalized, right? People who are happy to target the marginalized will target any folks who are marginalized. There happens to be one particular class, like trans folks, who are caught in the mix, or immigrants who are caught in the mix. But really, folks who aren't willing to stand up for those who are most in the target, well, what happens when the target shifts? Will those folks stand up then? And am I somehow in the wrong if I choose to use a kind of moral discernment to say, those folks aren't going to work for us? They're clearly not standing up for us now. They won't stand up for us later. I think in a lot of ways, if we can rally support as we have for No Kings, we should be able to do the same for policies and projects and advocacy that also require big change in the light of like extremely strong opponents, right? We have very strong opponents, not because of their, say, ethical standards or because of their rhetorical skills, clearly, but we know that there's a lot of money and a lot of force behind that. So if folks are willing to stand up and put their lives on the line to stand up against ICE, to stand up against these horrible policies, then we sure as heck can direct that same energy towards protecting immigrants, protecting trans people. This is not a zero-sum game, right? We don't have just, sure, there's not unlimited capacity, but we can't say, well, we're spending a lot of time on ICE out, and so we can't spend time on trans rights. That's not true. We need to be a little bit more creative if we think that's the case, or we need to find better ways of getting our priorities straight. We need to support those who are on the margins, and we need to support those who are getting the most attacked by a massive propaganda machine.
Yeah. No, it's again, it is an important fight, and it's a fight that we have to continue to engage in, but it's also, I think, important to understand, like, zooming out, bird's eye view. Ultimately, this is about protecting people and fighting for the ability to cause harm to people. And that's, I mean, there are no starker examples of this than what's going on in Kansas and in Tennessee and, again, states across the country where it is cruelty often for cruelty's sake. It is, targeting and attacking um in a way that you can't even really make up an excuse for how it's, protecting straight white families or whatever the arguments are. Like, these are things that are so abstracted from the original arguments that they were trying to make, that it is just, oh, we want to make life harder. We want to make life unlivable. We want them to leave or be forced to leave. It's it really is. I mean, when you zoom out and just kind of disconnect the party labels and system labels and all the like propaganda terms. It is literally, I want to take away the ability for a trans person to safely drive in my state. Like that is the argument that they're making. Like we want to, we want to take away a parent's right to be able to make healthcare decisions for their children that are backed by both the overwhelming consensus of healthcare science and data and structures. We want to take away the parent's right to even access that type of care. Like that's really what these things are about. These things are not about, some vague, you know, political or religious understanding of each individual human. Like these are attacks that are stripping literal rights away. And when you look at some of these rules and these legislations, I mean, they're going to target everybody, and they're creating a framework for which everybody's rights are going to be put at risk. When the federal government gets to decide this healthcare procedure is allowed, this one's not allowed, that's going to affect everybody one day. And that's going to be creating a framework for policy that can be duplicated on anything. It could be duplicated on what happens when they say that they don't want people with piercings anymore, that piercings are bad. Like, it sounds silly, but like, is it that much sillier than a lot of these other things? Like, what happens when access to other treatments? I mean, obviously women's health and like abortion treatments, and those are things that are constantly being under attack. But again, these are frameworks that can be duplicated in multiple scenarios, targeting multiple different things. And that's why it's so important that folks understand that when one of us gets attacked, it is an attack on all of us. It is an attack on the bulwark of what our rights are supposed to protect.
Well, speaking of people who like attacking other people's rights, I feel like one of the other topics that we have chatted about leading up to this podcast is one of our favorite people of all time. And I'm sure we are her favorite people of all time. Let's talk a
One
little
of
bit
the people of all
of
time.
all of the people. Let's talk about J.K. Rowling, famously, most notably known for being a massive transphobe online. Oh, sorry, I'm getting a message here. Oh, wrote a series of children's books. Um, it's not like she's most famous for being a transphobe these days. That's certainly what's not in the news. Actually, there's something else in the news, and that's the fact that there is a new Harry Potter series, TV series, and there's a lot of marketing behind this. But what's also interesting is there's a lot of money too. And J.K. Rowling, as the founder and creator of the Harry Potter franchise, gets a lot of this money from all of the people who are supporting the new Harry Potter intellectual property, whether that is through buying new Harry Potter books, the ones that were published back in the day, or through supporting the new series. But what's very key for people to know is that our spending of money isn't neutral. And when we spend money on Harry Potter, that money has a very specific funnel that it goes through. J.K. Rowling has her own personal charity that she specifically funds to support women's causes, quote unquote. What kinds of women's causes? Like, I don't know, the gender pay gap and things like that? Nope. It is a charity that specifically funds anti trans policy and legislation. She has not hid the fact, and she has stated publicly on Twitter, I'm going to dead name it, that the money from the Harry Potter series that people spend on Harry Potter is going to fund the anti trans charity. Now, I know that there's a lot of conversations within a lot of our circles about boycotts and the effect of kind of withholding money and spend. And there's also the reality that in a lot of places, if you were to simply say, well, I'm not going to buy anything from any company that ever sent money to particular anti-trans political parties, well, there wouldn't be any sort of products we could ever buy. But is this different for the new Harry Potter series and J.K. Rowling? Let's discuss.
Uh, we're gonna really jump into a bee's nest here, I think, or hornet's nest, whatever the phrase is. Um, I'll be brave and throw out a bit of a take here. Um, Listen, we all consume things that are not great. we all consume things, we all buy things from companies, we all go to places. And I think that there's an amount of grace that we can hold for people who find the most ethical way that they can to consume something that gives them some sense of joy. I'm trying not to be a yum or like a yum yucker here. Um, you know, here's what I'll say. You can get these books from a used book store. You can rent them from the library. You can rent the movies from the library. You can obtain the movies through other means. There are ways to get access to this content, which I think I'll say generously is fraught politically, socially, and ethically, in terms of the content of the material, not just the person who gets a lot of money from it. But if this is something that you care about, there are ways to, I think, more ethically consume it. I think, if you have to have a wand for some reason, there are Etsy stores who do that type of thing. I would say it's probably cooler to get one that's more custom to you anyway. If you want to get a wizard robe, fine. There are Etsy creators who do that. There are ways to consume, and also, frankly, I'll say this, there are really great fantasy series created for adults that I would highly recommend checking out from creators who are not transphobic, who, in fact, sometimes even novel ways, enjoy the company of queer people. There are great fantasy series. There are great novels. There are great things that you could become a massive fan of. Go watch the Dune movies. That's an employ. Go watch the Dune movies. They're really good. There are just other things out there to consume, and I think, we get caught in this, I think, very much a corporate. I mean, it is in many ways corporate propaganda that like we have to find identity through the things that we like. And my advice to folks in my life and the folks I engage with has always been, it's okay to be a like multivariable person. And in fact, that is probably the healthier thing to be. I never want to be a like, oh, I'm a this, like, oh, I'm a Harry Potter fan or I'm a Disney adult. Like and this is maybe my own personal aversion, this is my own thing. I hate being boxed in by like those very specific things. I think it's cool to like Disney if that's the thing that you enjoy, but I would encourage you find a couple other things that you like and engage with those things as well. And I think you can have a more full and robust human experience. Have I tiptoed around it enough, Willow?
Yeah, I think part of what's fun about these conversations is avoiding kind of repeating the fundamentalisms that we've all sort of come out of,
Mhm.
right? That there's very black and white lines to be drawn, and that there's a bad thing to do and it's simply bad, and if you do it, you're going straight to hell, right? It's like, no, I think for those of us that have come out of deconstructed, reconstructed, those sorts of mindsets and worldviews, are able to take on more complicated things about the things that we consume, about entertainment, about art, with a little bit more nuance and maybe some deeper discernment. I think at a very basic level, we can say there are other books, there are other wands, there are other things that one can do with their time. And there's also things that don't necessarily have to involve our participation with things that are actively doing bad. I think something that we've talked about recently is like, the way that big corporations work is that they hedge their bets. And so we've probably seen, campaign contributions, and a lot of big corporations send money to all different camps. Now we might say, oh, I'm not going to support those people because they're doing that. Well, like I said, everybody does that. Good luck.
Yeah.
I think what's different sort of materially about J.K. Rowling is that she has explicitly told the world, hey, I am going after trans people with the money that you give me. Please give me money
Yeah.
so that way I can go after trans people. I think that does create something for us within our consciences that should maybe make us think about, are there ways that I don't want to contribute, even in a secondary way, to the persecution of trans people? I think in some ways, if it comes down to this, if in our personal discernment, it comes down to my entertainment versus the safety of trans people, we need to have a long sit down with ourselves to say, why do I feel like these two things are of important or equal value? Why do I think that entertainment is maybe worth more than the political money that the political funds that go to restricting trans people's rights? Now, I'm not saying everybody's going to come to that sort of ethical conclusion. Everybody's going to do their own soul searching there. But I do also think that in a world that, well, we're seeing folks step away publicly or maybe quietly from trans rights, there is a thing that is said through one's support of the Harry Potter series as it stands, an uncritical support. And I do think that in an era where we want people to be kinder to each other, we want people to know that we are allies and that we have your support, I think that the support of J.K. Rowling symbolically stands against those things. So again, these are all things for people to consider within their own ethical frameworks. But I think it's also important for folks to have these other data, these other variables in making that sort of ethical decision.
Yeah, and I think like there are shades to all of this. Like there are like a gradient of interaction with this property. If you are a big public advocate for it's okay to consume Harry Potter content, you go to the theme parks and you buy the new media, you buy the games, you pay for everything that's brand new, you're always buying new content and things like that. Listen, I think that is bad and wrong, and I think that we should. There is a healthy social shame that one should feel for doing that kind of thing. That being said, go down the gradient a little bit. If you're somebody who, you know, enjoys the book copies that you already have, or picks up used book copies from a used bookstore and enjoys them because once every couple of years you like to revisit a couple things from when you were growing up, and like you understand that like, hey, movies take crews of hundreds of people to create, and she was more indirectly involved with the movies than not. And I love this director, I love the actors who are there, I love these performances. Like, movies are a different art form, and I understand like, okay, cool, I already own the movies, or I'm picking up a used copy of the movie, or I'm finding another means of accessing it, maybe through a library or other. That's fine. Like that's a different gradient. And then there's folks who I think are the most correct, which are these books are kind of reactionary and bad. I won't consume the book content because it's about a slave owning police officer in his origin story to keep everything mostly the same, except for now he's in charge. But you know what? The movies are fine, and maybe I'll check them out sometime when I'm like over with some friends. That I think is like, you know, the gradient of exposures here to these types of franchises and these types of, and again, there's not a lot of examples of this, frankly. Like I feel for the Harry Potter fans in this way, which is it's brutal for the person who is still alive, still operating in the world today, to be using her massive fortune from this franchise to harm a minority. Folks that are fans of Lovecraft do not have this problem. You know, they do not have this problem in the slightest. They can say Lovecraft was bad and, you know, racist and bigoted and all these things, but he's dead, and nothing that, you know, me consuming this Cthulhu content is not in any way creating a marginalized class on Turf Island, aka the UK. Like, that is a real, you know, again, there's the death of the author stuff that you get to engage with when that person is not an active force in the world. This person is an active force in the world. And I think that really does have to, like, we have to be able to draw that distinction of, you know, like, for instance, I was a big Star Wars head growing up. I loved Star Wars. It's harder to love Star Wars now, other than Andor, which is amazing and is very, very good. But if George Lucas was still in control of Star Wars and started, like, you know, there's some racial stereotyping in Star Wars. If you haven't watched the first episode one, it's brutal on a rewatch. By the way, okay, side tangent. The internet has to stop pretending like the prequels are good. Please, I beg you, please stop. These aren't good movies. It's crazy to me. Anyway,
Yeah,
but
I'm
if
gonna
George
edit that
Lucas was
out.
still, oh, you're gonna edit that out?
No, I'm not.
That's
I'm
crazy.
not. I'm not.
That's a perfect clip to start into a clip because that's gonna get people mad. Um, But like, if George Lucas was still in control of Star Wars and was doing the same type of thing that J.K. Rowling is doing, like, I understand what I would have to do, you know. And I think we have to be willing to uh, be introspective, and again, I think also challenge ourselves. And I think that's something that we've lost a little bit as a culture, um, or at least has become less popular to talk about. Like, oh, it's actually cool to challenge yourself, and it's cool to push yourself into new boundaries. It's cool to grow and to push for growth within yourself. You are valid in who you are. You are valid in everything that you love, and you're valid in all those things. It's also important to say, I'm valid, and I don't have to feel shame for existing as who I am. And also understand I want to grow as a person and become a better version and self actualize. And I think part of that is, as the Holy Book says, putting aside those childish ways sometimes and growing into deeper understanding of the world around you. Did I make enough people mad on that secondary take?
We'll see how people feel about the new interim ED.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But I think it's good though that we can have these different takes, right? Because uh, I think what we can do is help people in that discernment process, right? And it
Yeah,
is letting people know that there are stakes, right? Like there might be a
yeah,
stake for somebody in that, hey, if you want to publicly support J.K. Rowling, know that I personally will not view you as an ally anymore, right? If that matters to you, then include that in your ethical calculus. If it doesn't, do your thing, right? But I think that
yeah.
that's a kind of thing that when we realize that the world has a lot of trade-offs and a lot of what we're doing is unfortunately, and I hate to use these very capital driven terms, but like cost benefit analyses, a lot of ethical decision making is going to end up that way. So you have to decide what's most important for you. And so I think that when we think about this particular form of media and we think about the cost of participating in and having a public participation in that form of media, what is the cost and is it worth it to us? And also, like you said, Gerik, an easy answer is just there are other books out there. I can't not recommend Becky Chambers' Monk and Robot series. It's good. It's queer. There isn't racism and anti-Semitism in that and slavery like there is in the Harry Potter series. So those are good things to consume, and they will probably make us better people and won't remove us from communities that are looking for allies and looking for safe people.
Yeah, I think of it in a lot of ways like how I look back at my time in a very religious fundamentalist movement. I can look back on those moments in my life, and I was doing harm. I was in a harmful environment. It was harming me. It was harming the people around me. But I can still look back and appreciate some of those lessons that I learned, some of those things that I learned, some of those people that I built relationship with, some of those moments. And I think it's okay. And I think like in the same way that like I think we as a culture have forgotten how to take an L elegantly, like how to like, oh, like my bad. Let's move on. I'm so sorry. I'm gonna keep it. Like we've forgotten how to admit sometimes that we've made a mistake. In that same way, I think we have to in ourselves be able to carry two truths of like that was all bad and was bad for me and bad for the people around me. I also got immense good from it and got immense meaning from it and found the purpose in which I want to spend the rest of my life doing this type of thing. So I can carry both of those things and understand like I don't have to feel shame for having an emotional connection to Oceans by Hillsong Worship. Like I don't have to feel shame for having had that feeling and emotion and connection. But what I do have to be able to say is, but I'm not going to live in that forever. That like I can understand and appreciate what it gave to me while also understanding the immense harm that it caused to both me and the community around me, and then move forward with those positive lessons without having to justify it like justify it retroactively, like, oh well, it gave me good so it must be good. That's not always the case, unfortunately. And that's where I think there is a ability, I think, and I've seen a lot of people do this. I don't want to pretend like these people don't exist that are like, hey, those movies and those books meant a lot to me as a kid. I got a lot of great stuff out of it. It's not for me anymore, both in the content of what the material is and certainly in the creator. And like I can look back on that with warm fuzzy feelings sometimes while also being able to say it's harmful and not very good or healthy to continue to be engaged with it. And that's what I would encourage folks to be introspective on and see where they are on that, gradient of things of, being able to have that, again, that healthy appreciation for the good while also not ignoring the bad.
Well, friends, for some of you, this is your first announcement for the fact that OutCenter has a new podcast with me, Willow, and with Gerik. And the reason why you're seeing this now is because we have received late breaking news in the middle of our recording of the podcast. We wanted to include this right now because this is important news. But also, hey, we have a podcast that's coming soon. We're going to talk more about this and other issues. But for now, we do need to say something about the very recent Supreme Court case, Chiles v. Salazar. So let's talk about that really quick. We're just sort of seeing some of this for the first time. We're catching up on news. And so this is from the Human Rights Campaign. They have just announced at the time of this recording, less than an hour ago, the Supreme Court's decision, as I mentioned, Chiles v. Salazar. Let me just give you a little bit of background on this case. Essentially, what happened is a Christian therapist, a licensed mental health practitioner, made the claim that it was a violation of her First Amendment religious rights to not practice conversion therapy. And what's interesting is there are 23 different states that actually have bans on conversion therapy for minors. I also want to think about a specific term that I'm using, conversion therapy. Conversion therapy is a kind of practice that falls underneath a wider label called SOGICE. That's an acronym that stands for SOGICE, Sexual Orientation and Gender Identity Change Efforts. The reason why that term is preferred is because it encapsulates all different forms of conversion therapy and SOGICE, as some people try to get around it with PR and linguistics. Anyways, what's important to note right now is that the Supreme Court case just dropped. Essentially, what happened is the Supreme Court said that you can't have these bans on conversion therapy because it gets in the way of Christian nationalism and discredited medical practices. So just looking at this press release from the HRC right here, this is important stuff, important language. The United States Supreme Court invalidated a Colorado law that protects children from the dangerous practices of so-called conversion therapy, putting at risk the safety and well-being of children in Colorado, 23 other states, and DC with similar restrictions. In its ruling in Chiles v. Salazar, the court overruled best practice medical guidance, allowing kids to be subjected to harmful, abusive, and discredited attempts to convert their gender identity or sexual orientation by state-licensed mental health practitioners. Gerik, what should our response be to this?
Listen, right now it's shock and frustration more than anything else. I mean, we are looking at a Supreme Court that has continued to go up against what is medical best practices that are the recommendations of every mental health board that matters. These are things that are so obviously harmful and so obviously ineffective that it is hard to quite grasp where their perspective is coming from other than that of a place of bigotry or wanting to cause harm. I mean, right now, I mean, we had a brief discussion. I mean, we're looking at what does it look like for state regulation now? What does it look like for policy making within, local practices? What does it look like to have to now educate the public? So many folks are going to fall for language that is going to be a lot more vague right now. I mean, we've already seen some of these places pop up. Even in Southwest Michigan, of using more, disconnected language than some of the historical practices, trying to seem like it's a healing space instead of a space of harm. And right now it's just important to understand the stakes. I think more than anything else, that these are children's lives. That these are children that have been harmed. If you've not talked to somebody who's been through some of these practices, even some of the less severe versions of these practices, it is harrowing. And at the end of the day, the job of our government, the job of our state government, our federal government, is to protect the people within their state, within the country. And this is just another example of them instead of protecting, harming. And I mean, honestly, Willow, this is very much your area of study. I would love to hear your perspective on some of the ramifications and on, again, where this kind of puts us now, even as the state of Michigan, who has been, had some of these bans on the books that have been in limbo, that are now looking like they're going to be, unable to be acted on.
Yeah. So thanks, Gerik. The SOGICE is the main focus of my current research. And it is unfortunately an ever growing threat. And we are seeing it take up more space, like now with this SCOTUS decision. So SOGICE, for one, doesn't work. There is zero evidence, and I mean that. There's no asterisk after I say that it works. The handful of studies where people have claimed this have been soundly discredited, both on methodology and on like the actual fact that the people that they claimed changed didn't. The other side of this as well, it would be bad enough if somebody engaged in a medical practice that didn't work and it was just false advertising and fraud. But more than that, it's actually actively harmful. This is across the board, across all age cohorts, for both this overt, deeply violent, torturous type of conversion therapy and SOGICE practices, as well as these more subtle and covert types of SOGICE practices. There is no safe way to engage in SOGICE. The only answer is to have affirmation, right? In the same way that we'd affirm people no matter what their characteristics are. The thing is, SOGICE is completely an ideological position. It is not a set of evidence-based practices, and we know that this particular case is not drawing from the best analysis in case law, but really on a Christian nationalist worldview. There is no reason that a practice like this should have this much airtime at the Supreme Court, unless what is most important to SCOTUS is protecting Christian nationalism and a very particular kind of fundamentalist Catholicism, Protestant Christianity, all of the above. I think what this does mean for us is that we have to become more creative in how we stand against some of these things. So for one, if SCOTUS is saying that states cannot have legislation on the books, there are probably other ways of developing regulation that can prevent these practices from being done, or at least stand in the way of these things, or at the very least provide something like disclosures. There can be policy level friction that's created. For instance, there are large organizations like the APA, the American Psychological Association, that even if they can't create some sort of ban, they can be much stronger in their statements and codes of ethics about not practicing SOGICE of any kind. There can also be very local policy level types of instruments that are put into play. So for instance, private clinics could have policies where the folks who work as contractors of that clinic cannot engage in SOGICE, and it is explicitly laid out what SOGICE counts as, and that it cannot be practiced. So we will have to be more creative. We cannot simply rely on legislation. We have seen in the past, since 2024, that legislation has not always appeared to be durable in the cases where we have this undemocratic system taking over, whether that's through executive orders and people preemptively following them, or SCOTUS, which is completely ideologically bound to a rabid type of Christian nationalism. So that's where we're at, I think. I don't know, Gerik, what else should we add to that?
Yeah, I think this is why moving towards a people-powered movement is so incredibly important. These systems have shown us that they are not going to consistently be what we need them to be. That at the end of the day, we have large systems that are being controlled by folks who want to see harm done. And the only way we can counterbalance that, the only way we can counteract that, is by having people in our communities that are putting pressure now on our local systems, on our state systems, to ensure that we are protecting Michigan from becoming what could be worst case scenario, what Kansas is doing, what Tennessee is doing, what some of these other states are doing. And now the only option we have, understanding where the Supreme Court is going to align on some of these issues, which we've had strong reasons to believe they would be this way anyway, but now seeing it happen means that we have to fully understand now that this is going to have to come, that any positive change is going to have to happen from a mass movement of people. And that's why it's so important that folks who were at our No Kings rallies, who were, trying to get engaged in our local communities, have opportunities to get connected and get information so that they can be pushing back on their mental health, care, folks, the folks that they visit with their practitioners, with their healthcare practitioners, with their legislators, their local legislators, their state legislators. These are things that we have to now do because there just is not a national level protection that's going to be able to put in place. And, we're in a climate now where even these state legislations are being challenged. And so, again, this is why it's so important for folks to get engaged. And this is why it's so important for us to continue to move towards, again, mass movements of people, activated community members who are going to keep pushing back on their local level too.
Right. We can't tolerate this sort of thing, right? So we need to be able to build the kind of networks that are educated on identifying SOGICE. So that way families can tell other families, other queer people can tell other queer people about places that are not safe, even if they are giving this veneer of welcoming and affirmation on the surface. I think that does involve having higher standards for our legislators, right? So maybe they can't make laws, but they can still apply social and political pressure. The city that I'm in, we had a embarrassing turnout rate in terms of voting. It was an embarrassing turnout rate. And if there were people that could have voted and didn't, they should be embarrassed that they didn't. We cannot do that. That is unacceptable. And it is even more, it's something that we realize is even more problematic in our current world where all of this effort is being made to stand against queer people. So it's time to be activated. This is just one more element that's been added to this whole cultural shift away from LGBT safety. And really, it is the call, it is the invitation for people to get involved and to do what they can, become an ally, become educated, stand up for things, start going to city commission meetings, start working on local policies, and hold those local lawmakers' feet to the fire. Ask them to create welcoming environments, right? Even if there can't be bans on conversion therapy, can you have Pride Month declared? And again, shift the Overton window away from this extremist political agitation direction. These are all the little things that will start to add up and have this cumulative effect in creating a more welcoming community.
Yeah, it's up to us to hold candidates who are portraying themselves as pro-equity, pro-LGBTQ, pro-civil rights. We have to keep those folks accountable. It is a candidate's job in this primary season that we're in right now. It is their job to convince you. It is their job to stand for these things and to excite people to support them. And that's, one of the things that you can do right now. These folks are campaigning. They are going to public events. They are going to party offices. They are, wherever you align on the spectrum, these people are as accessible as they're ever going to be right now. And this is your chance to tell them what you want. This is your chance to confront them when they have not stood for LGBTQ folks. And this is your chance to push so that that's the Overton window that they're running on, that they're platforming right now. That's the opportunity we have. And that's the opportunity we have in front of us. And again, they're all coming, even to Southwest Michigan, even to our neck of the woods. We're seeing statewide candidates. We're seeing local candidates do events. And this is the chance that you have to really push when they're here listening, when they're trying to win your support. And I think that's one of those important moments that we're in right now, that you can actually start to get answers from folks. Go talk to the AG candidates, talk to your state representative candidates, talk to your federal representative candidates, and ask them what their stances are in public, in front of others. Make them go on the record on these things, because that is so incredibly important and valuable when people are trying to make that decision on who's going to stand for people and who's going to compromise. That being said, I hate to leave it on this kind of a note, but I think, again, there should be some understanding and there should be some hope that we are seeing people rise up. We are seeing people get involved. Again, we had thousands of folks out this weekend protesting, getting together, getting great information. I think that if we continue to fight, if we continue to organize, if we continue to stand for equity, stand for LGBTQ folks, stand for civil rights broadly. That's with migrant populations. That's with racial justice. That's with gender equality and with access to healthcare. I think we can create a coalition and create the change that we want to see in the state of Michigan and in the country as a whole.
I think that's a great way to close up what is the first chunk of the first podcast that OutCenter is going to be doing. And I think this illustrates exactly why we want to be doing this. We were in the middle of recording this podcast. We took a little break. I saw this email come in and we want to respond to it. And I think really what that means is we need to be more responsive. OutCenter will be more responsive. So for now, if you want to be involved in our response, go to outcenter.org/protocol for information about the worldview behind this Chiles v. Salazar decision, right? This unholy trinity of gender essentialism, of toxic masculinity, of Christian nationalism. outcenter.org/protocol, get educated. If you want more education, outcenter.org/questions, and watch our No Silly Questions videos. We are going to be doing more. And because of that, we need your support. We can't just kind of do this on our own. If you want to volunteer for us, reach out, info@outcenter.org. And you can make sure that we keep these videos and our other work going. We need your gifts. outcenter.org/donate. We're not asking just because we want to have a fun little side hustle over here doing our little activist stuff. No, we are actually doing the work. We are boots on the ground. We are talking to these people. We are helping to run protests, and we can't do this without you. If you want to support us, outcenter.org/donate. You can reach out to us at info@outcenter.org and be on the lookout for the future episodes of this podcast where we are going to continue talking about these important things and issues. We thank you all for hanging out with us during this time, and we invite you to be involved alongside us.